Hey guys, it's Dr. Gandolfo here, and you're joining me for episode 25 of the Real GI Doc Show. And this is going to be a different episode. If you notice, there's no intro music, there's no fancy intro talk that I try to do usually. And we're just going to talk for about 5 minutes about where the show is going, and I need a lot of help from you, my listener. I need a little help. At the end of this, I'm going to tell you what to do to give me a little guidance here and figure out what works for this show and what you want to hear. So I started this thing a few months ago, and I've been doing one episode a week, and I amazingly have not actually missed an episode. I really thought that this would be a really hard schedule, and it is a lot of work to keep these episodes going every week, but I think I'm finally getting the hang of the flow and maybe making the episodes a little shorter and a little less editing, and I'm saying a lot less ums and uhs when I'm recording, so that's a nice thing. A lot less editing of filler words. But when I started this thing, I said I was going to do it for about a year. I wanted to give it a 1-year commitment and kind of reevaluate things, because these kind of experiments take a long time to get going. And I've heard that it takes about 2 years to really get a good solid following on a podcast, and I believe it, because so far, after releasing 25 episodes now, we only have about 2,400 downloads, which is not a lot, and the numbers don't really matter as much as I guess I thought they would originally, but it does matter because I don't want to feel like I'm wasting time every week talking to the void. And this is a common thing with podcasting. Apparently, you put a lot of work in and nobody cares for a long time, and I don't expect you to care, and why would you care? But what this episode is just about is I really just want to know what you care about. What do you want to hear as a listener? If you want to continue to listen to the show, how would it better serve you and how would it better suit your needs? Because I am kind of just talking about stuff that I like to talk about and topics that come up in my day-to-day work life. And all this medical stuff is stuff that I talk to patients about all the time. So it doesn't serve me a ton to talk ad nauseum about certain topics if they're not interesting to people, because it just doesn't. I like to do stuff like that because I'm a nerd, but if you don't want to hear it, or if you want to hear something different, I really, really, really want to know about it. I want to know what you want to hear. So at the end of this episode, I'm going to ask you for some feedback of some sort. I need your feedback to keep the show interesting. Before I ask you for that, I do want to tell you about my upcoming plans for the show as we move into the winter. So far, I've been doing this show in my office in various areas, maybe at my desk, maybe in some back room somewhere. I drag the microphone out and hook it up. It takes about 5 minutes. And then I check the sound and record the show. But I've always wanted to have a dedicated space to do the show in, because it makes it a lot easier. I could just plop my butt down on a chair and just start talking. Everything will be set up and everything will be kind of the same between every episode, which would be really easy for me and lower the barrier to record a quick show every week. So I've finally found a little space in my office that I can call my own, and I can dedicate it to the podcast without bothering anything else going on in the office. So that's exciting for me. And the other exciting thing there is I can add video to the podcast. So I always wanted to do this. I always actually envisioned this thing as a video podcast when I was first thinking about it. And then I realized that would be a ridiculous amount of extra work to get a video going with a podcast. But I think with a dedicated space where I could just kind of leave everything set up, once I nail down the lighting and all that jazz, I can just do a short video podcast as well as the audio podcast. So maybe I won't do the entire audio podcast as a video, but little clips for social media or interesting parts would be pretty cool, because it gets boring to look at that little thing floating around on Instagram with my head and the sound wave. I think that's boring, but it's all I got right now. So I think if I added some video, it would be pretty cool, especially when I have some guests on. It'd be nice to see what the guests look like and have the interaction on video. I think that's much more interesting to view. So look forward to that. I'm not saying when it's going to happen, because it's going to take me time to get everything set up, and I'm doing it on my, quote, spare time. So it may take longer than I would imagine, but I'd like to get it going in the next month or so. The other things I'd like to do are have some more interviews. So I have a few people that I'd like to get on the show for interviews, and now that I will have a space, hopefully soon, that would be nice to have interviews in that space, and a lot better than sitting in my waiting room and doing an interview, because I think it's a little easier to get a guest on the show if we have a dedicated space to record. So that's kind of something cool that I'm looking forward to as well. And the other thing I wanted to just mention is that I think I'm going to move toward these quicker episode style podcasts, because as much as I can blab on and on about some topic, and I always think I'm starting off with some simple 5 or 10 minute podcast, I end up going into the background of the thing and then the terms and then more background and then explain some other side thing. By the time I get to the point, it's 20 minutes into the podcast, then I'll talk about that thing for a while and then I'll wrap it up with some nonsense. And I think that just takes too long. And I think that people probably zone out about halfway through that unless they're really, really, really interested in the minutia. So maybe I'll do some of those episodes occasionally where I fulfill my inner nerd, but I think the shorter episodes are probably more consumable and I can answer some questions a little more quickly for people. I'd also like to do a lot more of the Q&A episodes. I think those seem to be the most interesting based on the views that I get. And the good news is I have a whole bunch of questions that people have submitted in the last month or so that I have not had a chance to answer. And I'd like to get to those throughout November and December. A whole bunch of good questions there. So please continue to submit those Q&A questions because those are great. By definition, I kind of know that someone wants to hear the answer to that question. So it's really nice. So that's really it. Today was just a recap of the show, where it started, where it's going, and that I'd like to continue to do these shows, but I really need to know what you want to hear. So in order to understand what you want to hear as my viewer and cater to what you want to hear, I need you to send me an email. The email address is Fred, F-R-E-D, @realgidoc.com. You can also find a link to send me an email on the podcast page, and I'll also put a link in the show notes if you're into that. But just send an email, fred@realgidoc.com, REALGIDOC.com, and tell me what you want to hear. Quicker episodes, longer episodes, more detail, less detail, topics you want to hear about, interviews you want to see, more interviews, whatever you think when you're listening to the show and say in your head, oh man, I wish he talked about this, or what is he talking about here? I've kind of lost it and glazed over with the length of the episodes, or whatever your feelings are, please send me an email. You're not going to offend me. I am not worried about that at all. I just want to get the feedback for better or for worse. And the other ask would be, if you like the show, if you're a fan of the show and see some potential in it, please share it with somebody. The show gets very little in terms of shares, and if you share with a friend, if you share on social media, if you send the episode to a friend in an email, that would be immensely helpful to get the show growing to different audiences. I know the people who follow the show already on social media are probably listening, or some people are probably listening, so I don't need to keep badgering those people to listen to the show, but I want to try to get some new people involved. There's a lot of people out there that probably could benefit from some of the information presented here, whether someone has a certain condition that I covered that you know, and you may want to send that over to them, or whether someone has a whole bunch of digestive issues and you want to just send them the show and say, hey, this guy might cover your issue, or hey, he covered your irritable bowel type issue. Is this helpful? That kind of stuff is really helpful, because any little new audiences I can find will help to spread the show and get the downloads up, and that will help me to feel like I'm actually speaking to people and not to the great void beyond. Anyway, thank you for listening to this. And if you're already a listener, obviously, if you're listening to the show for a while, I just want to thank you for listening in general. And please, please, please leave me some feedback. That's really what I need at this point. After 25 episodes, I want to make 100 episodes. I want to make 200 episodes. But to get there, I really need to make sure that I'm talking to people about stuff that they care about. Because after all, the show really is for you. It's for my listener. I don't get anything out of this show besides a place to talk to myself in a room, which, if I was not talking into the microphone, people would think I was crazy. Anyway, that is the story here. I'll see you next week with a topic. I think I'm going to do a Q&A of some sort. And that's it. I look forward to seeing you from my studio space shortly. Thanks for listening, and take care.